What's up, A24 fans? Welcome back to the channel. I Saw the TV Glow as their brand new feature. I was fascinated by the trailer and the early word of mouth, but what is this movie all about? Let's discuss.
You remember a TV show we used to watch together? It was called
The Pickup Eight?
You have two teenagers who are bonding over their love of a supernatural TV show, but it is mysteriously canceled. This film is set in the 90s, and it's rated PG-13 for violent content, sexual material, thematic elements, teen smoking, and some very horrific elements in the film. At times, this movie feels like a horror film. There are very sci-fi elements to it. It's a coming-of-age story, if you will, and I think my personal favorite part about it, other than certain visuals, which are spectacular, is the fact that it captures some of that mid-90s nostalgia, and it's just that feeling of a lot of people who are trying to find solace in the idea of certain types of creative content. So that's really cool. And speaking of the mid-90s aesthetic, the Pink Opaque, the show that our two main characters are bonding over, is very reminiscent of some late-night shows that a lot of people in the 90s grew up with that kind of pushed the boundaries just a little bit, that had some interesting and fascinating visual effects in there that we get to see while watching this movie. And this is what kind of pushes this film all over the place in terms of genre, which is something that I respect, right? It's not just a coming of age. It's not just reminiscent of a sci-fi film that I've seen here or there, but it's horror. It's kind of thrilling. It has a mysterious vibe to it where you are just kind of sitting and waiting to see what the meaning of all of this is. But for a lot of people, when it comes to the end of this movie, you may not get everything that you're wanting out of it. And that's kind of how I felt once we got to the climactic elements of the film. Now, I say climactic and climax, and that's what she said.
That's what she said.
Our characters here, they have a way of delivering their dialogue, and I actually think the performances are great. We'll talk about that here in a second, but it comes across as very dry, almost this monotone delivery that not everyone's going to be able to latch onto. Now, if you feel and really connect yourself to the way that Owen and Maddy are feeling in this film and how they are attaching themselves to this program to almost find themselves in a way because they themselves have questions about life and why do I feel like I have to suppress my identity to the world? And those are questions that a lot of people have about themselves and things that they're going to be able to latch onto when it comes to this movie. But it's the delivery and the way that they communicate in somewhat of an emotionless way that will resonate with a lot of people. But for me, I wasn't on the same wavelength as our characters and as this movie was presented to me, and so I couldn't really find myself as someone who was connecting to the story all that much because I just couldn't find that character or really characteristic that I could attach myself to. Now, the thoughts and feelings that they are having that is made evident by the style and the way that the visuals come about, that I was impressed with and I connected to. And the style in general of this film, the cinematography, the movie's called I Saw the TV Glow, but there's this glowing sensibility about some of the effects and some of the text that appears on screen and just the way that our characters are highlighted that I thoroughly enjoyed. And it's a movie that had me thinking, right? Even though I didn't connect to it at the end of the day, and it's not one that I was all that thrilled with as an experience, at least it made me think. And so this is one, and sometimes you'll hear people say this about movies and it's all BS, and oftentimes, it does kind of sound like BS, but I mean it when I say it. I respect this movie, not just because I respect Jane Schoenbrunn as a filmmaker, and I'm like, yeah, there is a vision here, and I can see that there was a vision. It's not one that I was able to resonate with. And it's not a film that's going to be accessible to everyone, but it doesn't necessarily need to. Those that have the same thoughts and feelings and they're able to pick up on some of these subtleties with our characters, with the story, I feel like that makes it worth it at the end of the day. And if it sounds like something that interests you, just know that the dryness of certain plot points and then the ending is not going to give a lot of people everything that they're wanting, and they will be left with questions. But even then, sometimes it is about the journey, and the journey that our two characters are on, and the relatability to some of their circumstances and situations. I mean, she has an abusive father, he has a sick mother and an abusive stepfather, and they really are just trying to find an escape through this television show that becomes something more as we go. It's also a movie that skips a lot of time, and so I really felt the void of a certain period of time that we skip, going from one moment in his life to the next moment that is very spread out. And I do think we could have filled that time with something to learn more about him, find more ways to connect to him as a character. And even though the delivery is dry and oftentimes emotionless, I thought the performances were really good. Justice Smith is someone that, sometimes I love him. Last year, Dungeons & Dragons, awesome. Other times, I've been like, I feel like I want something more from him. And even though I did want something more from his character in this movie, I thought the performance was really good.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Owen had a lot of trouble being noticed when he was younger. His mother was the only person he could talk to. And then when he makes friends with these older girls and they tell him about this show, he finally finds something, meaning within this small portion of his life that really drives the rest of his life. And so the significance of that moment is very important, and that makes Owen a character who is at least interesting, and Maddy, who is interesting when we first meet her, much older. There is a maturity about her, but also the way that she approaches this show that they share this bond over is fascinating. And then as we move through the story and as we skip time, the potential of this story that almost felt like it could have been the opposite of The Ring, where things come out of the television. In this movie, it could have been the reverse, where you kind of get sucked into the story, and that sort of plays out in that way, refraining from spoilers here. But there's an interesting twist or two or three or four or five that come about when it comes to this show, to where you get those prosthetics and the effects and the horrifying imagery on display, and that makes it a stylistic movie. But I just didn't really feel a connection to the story that was on screen, and there were certain scenes that don't seem to go anywhere. And with a movie that's so upfront about taking risks, I felt as if some scenes and sequences just kind of wasted my time in its entirety. Now, that's not going to be the same for people who are really connecting to this movie and these characters. And so that's why I find it so fascinating. And oftentimes I see movies that are just plain bad, and it's a dump truck film. You just don't think about them within a day or two. But I actually had to go back, I think this is my first time saying it in this review, and watch this again. Because I thought about, maybe this could have clicked, or maybe this could have worked. And knowing the ending, that is ultimately, after two watches, just a very disappointing ending, maybe that will help the second time around. And I do like the contrast between the very just normal and straightforward bond that our two characters share. That feels grounded. And then you have this show and everything that it stands for and means, and the sci-fi heavy feel of it all, but also those terrifying elements. And by the time you get to the end and you see what this actually means and where you're going, you may not be satisfied, but at least you're like, okay, that's cool.
I mean, it's all right.
It's just so frustrating for me because there is this open-endedness to the ending, to where sometimes I'm like, all right, that's awesome. That's exactly how it needed to end. Other times, something like an Uncut Gems, I'm just like, yeah, people aren't going to like that, but it worked and it made sense narratively. With this film, I needed more to chew on along the way. So by the time you get to the ending, that happens and you're just like, oh, so all I feel here is empty. There's no real sense of satisfaction. And as, I'm walking out, I did start thinking about it a little more and what this moment meant. Maybe I wasn't as invested in the dialogue here, but I should have paid more attention. And that's what the second watch was for. But I still never found it. Sometimes that isn't going to give you the answers you were looking for. And so that's what I'm intrigued by. What did you all get out of this movie that it failed to give me? And it's not the Poltergeist. So if you see the poster, don't expect that kind of movie. Thank you guys so much for watching. Before I give you my score, if you like this review, dropping that thumbs up's the best way to let me know. And what is your favorite lower budgeted A24 movie? I Saw the TV Glow features some beautifully constructed sequences. The often mesmerizing visual style reflects the tone, and it does tap into that 90s nostalgia while exploring the connection that some have with certain forms of escapism. That being said, I struggled feeling invested with any of the characters. This story often feels as if it isn't really going anywhere, and while I see the metaphors and artistry on display, it never quite clicked for me. I would rather have a movie that takes risks as opposed to playing it safe. And so for that reason, I think this one is worth checking out just to see if you respond to it or not. All opinions are welcome. Thank you so much for showing up, coming to this review, checking it out, and stay tuned because there's a lot of stuff I didn't get to yet this weekend, so more reviews on this channel. And next week, Furiosa. Ooh, and Hitman, which I saw. Can't wait to talk about that.